When the great architect Frank Lloyd Wright was asked if he believed in God, he replied, "I believe in God, only I spell it nature." Frank Lloyd Wright, who was reared as a Unitarian, was what would probably be called a religious naturalist. Religious naturalism is a new evolving theology within our religious community and outside our community. There are two exclusively Unitarian Universalist cemeteries. I went to one of them and graduated with a Master of Divinity from Meadville Lombard, which is affiliated with the university. At the time, it was affiliated with the University of Chicago Theological School. I took general courses at the University of Chicago and the Unitarian Universalist specific courses at Meadville. One of the courses that was required at Meadville Lombard was entitled Theologies of the Liberal Church. The course covered theological expressions commonly found among Unitarian Universalists, and it took that examining seriously with reading and study. Some of the theologies studied were liberal Christianity, neo-paganism, humanism, and some other beliefs cited from the sources of the Unitarian Universalist principles and purposes. In that class, I found that I really appreciated our Unitarian Universalist Christian heritage and considered that to be part of my religious perspective. When I was 10 years old, I came to the conclusion that all souls eventually went to heaven and that Jesus was more human than divine. To become a Unitarian Universalist enabled me to integrate my childhood faith with a movement that embraced theological diversity. I also took profound spiritual sustenance from being in nature and learning about science. Some suggested that I was a neo-pagan or humanist because some of my spiritual life was tied to the natural world, like neo-paganism and science, like humanism. Neither religious belief, though, spoke to my experience of nature or science. Neo-paganism harkens back to ancient religions and spiritual practice of pre-industrial people. Humanism places a high esteem on science, but does not speak of the joy of standing under a maple tree in late October. I remember reading back issues of the UU Humanist from the 1960s and 1970s. Never did any of the writers speak of holding another person's hand or playing with a baby. Humanism placed humanity at the center of its focus, a perspective I felt prevented one from connecting effectively with nature or anything greater like God. I respect people who find grounding in these religious sources, but back then I did not have words to express my other spiritual source. I knew that something was also there, but nothing in experience could define what I was feeling. There just wasn't anything available to say, yes, that's it. Nowadays, I can tell you that I am a religious naturalist. Religious naturalism has been among Unitarian Universalists for a long time. The transcendentalists from our religious heritage took inspiration from the natural world. The quotes from Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau were too numerous to cite this morning. Some of our predecessors in this faith found spiritual strength from encounters with the natural world, hearing sermons in Wind Through the Trees. Later, our religious movements, Unitarian and Universalist, embraced the findings of Darwin's evolutionary theory, which placed humanity in connection with the earth and scientific methodologies as bearers of truth. These trends in our religious movement tend to point to key beliefs that are important to religious naturalism. It is important to acknowledge that religious naturalism has no creed or definitive statement and is still open to differing points of view. There are some common beliefs that bind religious naturalists together. Religious naturalists believe that the human story is intimately connected to this planet. Humans are not uniquely separate from nature. We are a product of the processes of life on Earth and connected to every living thing. For religious naturalists, this understood connection with life, geology, astronomy, and other natural and scientific experiences and learning are spiritual experiences of wonder and mystery. And at the same time, religious naturalism recognizes that humanity is not at the center of the universe. Humanity is merely a sentient part of the universe, looking at itself and still learning all the complex relationships between matter and energy, time and space. That learning journey is a sacred journey for our species, and it is something that will always move us with more questions than answers. We are ultimately the universe learning about itself. As Karl Peters, a Christian religious naturalist, writes, to wrap one's mind around the immensities of space and time is to feel awe, wonder, and humility. To see how a small planet adrift in space could have nurtured in its bosom the grand experiment that is life is to peek into Darwin's mystery of mysteries. To test our eyes upon the landscapes of our lives and to understand how they have enabled the formation of creatures such as us is to sense a surging loyalty to the sustained vitality of these life-giving ecosystems. Evolution outlines the grand art of cosmic events. It forms the incredible journey the world has undergone, such that we improbable creatures could emerge. It informs us of the grounds of our ecological citizenship. Finding those connections, religious naturalists find greater connection to the earth and calls to work for social justice. To understand that we are connected to earth and life fosters kinship with other forms of life, and an environmental consciousness emerges that encourages work for environmental justice. The same kind of connection to other humans fosters social justice, because all have inherent worth and dignity and deserve respect. Religious naturalism can be a separate theological concept, or it can be connected to existing theological concepts, as long as those concepts make space for science and nature and revere humanity broadly enough to revere human diversity and human rights. By seeing the larger picture, by acknowledging the connections between ourselves and the universe, we acknowledge that what befalls other human beings affects us all. We are not separate or special. The suffering of one is the suffering of all. Here are some of the basic concepts that Rex Hunt describes as basic to religious naturalism. Holds a naturalistic view of how things are in the world, see themselves as religious or spiritual in non-traditional ways as they absorb the wonder of being alive and the order and beauty of the cosmos. Ask what is and what matters questions, citing wisdom from natural rather than supernatural sources, including science, art, literature, philosophy, and world religions. Respect things that clearly matter, such as ecological stability and social justice. Seeks to learn from and care about the natural world, including humankind. Hunt also asserts that religious naturalists explore more than one religious tradition, seek to discover the counterpoint between divergent themes within a religious tradition rather than glossing over them, acknowledges that such exploration needs to go beyond the official interpretations stated by any tradition, and to push and to, where necessary, reconstruct boundaries, encourage an openness or dialogue in which both the self and the tradition is challenged to learn and grow. Nature and science and religious perspective are very important to me. I grew up in a very conservative, very Southern Protestant context, yet my family also had an amazing reverence for science. I was introduced to Darwinian evolution at an early age. Nature has always been part of my spiritual journey. I was confident in my agnostic approach to religion as a young adult until I found myself praying as I hiked one day along an Appalachian trail. The thoughts and feelings that I had from that experience can only be expressed in a Unitarian Universalist context of respect for diversity, other human beings, the natural world, and science. This may or may not speak to your experience or to your theology. In preparation for this presentation this morning, I watched a video by a colleague of mine in the Unitarian Universalist ministry. He began his remarks by stating that religious naturalism was the only perspective that all Unitarian Universalists shared. Now, I doubt that that is true, as I have known Unitarian Universalists who were uninspired by the natural world or science. Such a general statement seems unifying, but it is also excluding a possibility and a diversity of belief that so characterizes our faith, from my perspective. It seems likely that the personal experience of the natural world is or has been important for many of us. What you may have taken from that is based upon your context and the beliefs that ground you in reality as you understand it. I imagine that many more of us took delight in nature when we were children than we have done as adults. As adults, we have so many matters distracting us, so many concerns, and so many environments that do not connect us well with the natural realm. Yet, as Ursula Goodenough observes, children are very aware of the natural world, and they are able to take delight in the details and the aesthetic experience of being in nature. Do you remember that from your childhood? The small aspect as well as the grandness of the natural world? Ursula Goodenough writes that we possess as part of our genetic heritage an aesthetic for the natural is readily affirmed by taking a young child for a walk in the woods or by the sea and witnessing her innate delight in all she beholds. This delight has little to do with sunsets or vistas or order or pattern or purpose. The delight is with the particular. The ladybug crawling on the rock, the fuzzy moss, the tickly dune grass, the mucky mud by the river. Children connect with the immediate and become a part of it. The mud isn't messy, or rather, its messy is what makes it wonderful. Children are inherently attuned to nature. I do this with my son on our walks. He finds delight in watching bees, and so do I. The most spiritually uplifting moment in the pandemic lockdown, political anxiety, natural disaster, social distancing, and so many other troubles, was watching honeybees flitting from flower to flower last spring and summer. For years, we have heard that honeybees were dying off. I had not seen a honeybee in years. I worried about how their decline would affect the natural balance, human food supply, and what it would be like if they died. And there they were, totally oblivious to my anxieties, collecting nectar, pollinating plants, busily doing the things that they do. For my son, it's probably true that these creatures that fly, sting, and make honey are just so there. Looking up at the sky with stars and galaxies sparkling in the night is such a very moving experience for many people. The realization of the vastness of the universe and our smallness is a spiritual experience if one is open to it. That is the kind of mystery and revelation that religious naturalism speaks to. Much more could be said about religious naturalism than we have the time to cover. If this new learning does not speak to your experience and to your faith, do not despair. Unitarian Universalism is a small denomination with a big tent when it comes to belief. We are possibly the only organized religion that accepts that it does not have all the answers to the religious questions. What we have is a journey together. In that journey, I hope that we will accept religious naturalism as one of many paths.